This is, I hope, going to be both a lively and an informative coda to the public part of what has clearly been an interesting day today. You will see beside me here, teed up nicely for you, is a matched set of serious notables, all of them ready, able and contractually obliged to deal with your questions about really almost any aspect of the topic that you've been discussing today, any of the main themes of today. This is the time to ventilate your views.
Hello, Philippa Bonella from SCIAF. Actually, this is a question that Judith raised in our workshop, which I was going to ask this morning. But in SCIAF, we have a do no harm policy in all of our international development work. And while I could fully see that in a lot of the work that we do overseas, the private sector could bring a lot of expertise and probably scale up some of that work, where I really struggle with is understanding how we could make sure that it's the poorest people who get the most benefit and that we're not inadvertently causing negative consequences. So I just wonder generally how people would deal with that kind of situation and make those decisions when they're thinking about a project.
That's partly about ownership, Judith, isn't it? It's partly about who owns the policy, the project, rather.
Well, and also in terms of practice, what's underpinning the desire to get involved and how are you going to put that into place? So you can test whether your policies and practices are having a negative impact, that you can find that out. It's not actually difficult, but it does take resources and it's a cost that would be attached to any process of engagement in developing countries. So I think it is a cost that has to be factored, well, from our perspective, would have to be factored in private sector engagement, because that principle of doing no harm, you actually have to think about it, and I don't mean to be cheeky about it, but you have to understand what's happening when you go into communities and have an impact, whether it be land use, water use, other resource use, labour use, whatever. That's an important consideration.
I also wonder, Brian, whether you have a partnership taking place between an NGO and a business, whether you're actually working to the same definitions of what good and harm are, or do you have quite different understandings of what those are?
Yeah, I think that the projects which are directly funded by the Scottish Government through the International Development Fund, we tend to fund projects by NGOs or benevolent organisations where we have an opportunity to assess who benefits from those projects and to make sure that the poor benefit the most. When you're talking about a partnership related to corporate social responsibility or a commercial venture like Anton's catfish in Uganda, I think there's a strong responsibility there on the NGO or the charitable or benevolent organisation to make sure that the poor do benefit.
Anton, how do you resolve those sorts of issues in the case of your project? Who polices it?
Well, that was the point that I was going to raise. I think you still have to act as the control. You know, you enter something on your own terms. I think people, NGOs, charitable organisations are understandably nervous and cautious and for many of the right reasons. But I think there's an opportunity to be proactive and try and find even a small scale partnership opportunity where you can sign up in an area you know well, you are in control. And I think what I've understood a little bit from today's discussions is that there are a lot of businesses out there who are ready to engage at various levels. And I think, if you do it on your own terms as an NGO, then you start off with that control rather than being at the mercy of the person who's approached you, the organisation who's approached you.
Ian, it's an old worry for NGOs of any sort that any sort of interaction with the external world dilutes their agenda. NGOs are set up with a particular agenda in mind, the particular set of values that they want to apply, and that they're going to have to compromise on that if they're going to work with other people. I mean, is that something we simply have to get used to?
I would say not. You've got the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation have created a set of principles called the Equator Principles, and you have to generally demonstrate adherence to those principles before you will be able to draw down any money from those lending agencies. So you're looking at social and environmental issues under the Equator Principles, and for example the displacement of people. If you're looking at creating a hydro plant, or affecting the environment in some manner. I was looking at a project in Chile, which might show you the extremes that they were going through there, and they were moving a 90-year-old cacti plant that were about 2 meters tall, because certain ones would have been affected by the layout of a wind farm. So these were being displaced to demonstrate compliance with the Equator Principles. So it's both people and environment are generally held quite close with regards to financing renewable energy projects and other infrastructure.
Jane Gott, a very basically, SCDI almost uniquely covers public sector, private sector, third sector organisations. Do they all speak the same language to each other, and do they all mean the same things when they do?
They probably don't speak the same language, but they have the same message, which is about sustainable economic prosperity. They may not say it in the same language that they all understand, but everyone has that same shared ambition. And in terms of international growth, I think we all have that ambition for Scotland. It's something Scotland's very good at. What we would say to companies if they're looking at starting out in internationalisation is how they do business here in the UK, how they conduct themselves here, how they pay their staff, how they look after their staff. It shouldn't really be any different if they trade overseas. And I think companies are amenable to that message, and they understand that, because if they want to succeed in a market, and Ian will know all about this, it's long-term relationships with businesses in overseas markets, it's long-term gains, it's long-term strategies. So
well, hang on, Jim, we're always constantly hearing about investment whizzing around the world at the press of a button to wherever market conditions happen to be cheapest that day. I mean, does everybody think in these idealistic long-term?
well, if you want to do business in China and if you want to do business in India, you're in it for the long term, because it's not immediate success. You have to take your time to know who you're working with, you have to know your partners, you have to know your agents, you have to understand the culture. It's very important. And I think businesses that just dip in, dip out, probably find that they don't have a successful international strategy.
Let's take some more questions. Hand up over there, yeah. Can we get the mic over? Thanks.
I don't know if you can readily give me an answer, but obviously I try to support smallholder, marginalised producers, small cooperatives.
Sorry, would you tell us who you are?
Oh, sorry, Eve Brodus, Fairtrade Scotland. The problem I have is that because of supermarket culture, these small producers can't scale up. You know, you can't go from, you used to use Crafts, for instance, 5 shopping bags. There was a story of Tesco's wanting 200,000 Fairtrade organic cotton bags about 5 years ago. And this little cooperative could only make sort of about 100 a week. Well, there's no way they could do that. The customers were saying, we want fair trade cotton bags. So, you know, they have to go to plantations. So we're sort of losing out on the smallholder cooperatives. So how can we give market access to these small, you know, small producers? Because everything's in big volume here.
Access to markets here?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Who wants to pick that up from the panel? A volunteer from the panel to pick that one up? Yeah.
It's not so much, sorry, to directly answer your question about access to markets here, but the model that we're developing in Uganda, the business model there, is to support small-scale producers through a marketing channel that will be operated effectively through a central entity to enter the domestic market and to grow from there. I think there's no magic solution to scaling up from 100 bags a week to 20,000 overnight. That's not going to work in anybody's book. But to access increasingly valuable domestic markets is also a great opportunity, I think, for building capacity and strength and understanding. Very unfair of Tesco's to expect an organisation to produce that many bags overnight necessarily. But then I guess if we've also started to change the corporate, larger organisation mentality in relation to fair trade production, you know, that's a step in a positive direction as well.
Judith, you wanted to come in on this. I have to say you would hear many of the same complaints from small businesses here. Yeah.
Absolutely. From one, I'll just do a bit of shameless plugging, okay? Oxfam has, in early June, launched a big campaign called the Grow campaign, which was really looking at issues of food security around the world. Because food production issues there's 1 billion people currently going hungry today, where the system is failing literally hundreds of millions of people around the world at the moment as we speak. So we are in a relatively privileged position to be able to have this conversation, to be honest. And one of the solutions actually that we are proposing in that process is that we have to reinvest in rural agriculture. We can't just continue to invest in agribusiness. That's not a sustainable business model into the future. So, and in fact, investment in rural agriculture has declined over the last kind of 10 to 20 years, massively, to the point where, and what that means in real terms is who's doing the R&D on drought-resistant crops when climate change is causing massive droughts in the large plains of East Africa? Who's doing the community development work that will enable small-scale producers, predominantly women, to come together into cooperatives or come together to be able to... Nobody's saying that poor communities shouldn't be able to access those larger scale markets or saying that somehow they should be deprived access to Tesco, but that how do we get the capacity to the point where they're able to do that? So I think some of those investment issues are very alive and real.
Brian, can you pick up on that? Because one of the themes that came out of the workshop that I was sitting in on was that perhaps the most valuable, or one of the most valuable sources of partnership of all between business and NGOs is actually about lending expertise in the business-like skills that NGOs often lack in terms of things like writing a business plan, like talking to banks, like scaling up businesses and so forth. Can the Scottish Government help with that?
I think that one of the things that came out of today that I've been considering is how we can encourage the sorts of collaborations between business and NGOs, but also between different kinds of NGOs. So for example, if we have an energy project in sub-Saharan Africa which is interested in making that project sustainable, can we link up with NGOs like Imani or others who do economic sustainability through business models effectively? So I think there is a role for government there in partnering NGOs in that way.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Judith's point because I think that's really interesting that there are firm level interventions and you can use them as demonstration effect or demonstration models, but there are massive underlying structural problems which are like, most of Africa's yet to go through a kind of agricultural revolution. The productivity is dire, and so to try and visit all of the national problems on one company is to expect too much, and really there are much bigger underlying problems. Also things like infrastructure and whatever. So I think that there's the agricultural enabling environment for your average farmer, but then there's also a business enabling environment that has to be implemented across the board, like having functioning roads and transport links or whatever. And what's the perspective that might be doing people a favour more than working at the individual firm level?
Do you want to come back on that one?
Andrew?
Yeah, do you want to was probably pitching it a bit high.
No, I'm happy to. I think it's all about balance. That because large-scale infrastructural changes, and the investment in rural agriculture is only one of the large-scale infrastructural changes Oxfam would be looking for if we were going to achieve a sustainable food system. Flamboyant investment practices and speculating on commodities, for example, pushing food prices up artificially around the world is another major dynamic, to be honest. So there's more than one picture. So the issue is about balance. Infrastructure investment is really important because otherwise you can't get the goods to market. So there's no point in doing community development because there's no way of it's too difficult. I mean, we were talking earlier about Malawi. You get hundreds of thousands of mangoes in Malawi. There is no infrastructure to use those mangoes to produce something which is a value-added product which can be exported or just sold locally.
So I'm guessing infrastructure investment is crucial in sort of work you do.
Yeah, well, we focus on energy, and I think looking at countries that have yet to have an integrated grid system, for example, I think there's clear opportunities to try and map out what you can achieve grid-wise and put in a variety of technologies that can power that grid from biomass or wind or hydro. So the time is now to make these strategic decisions and provide energy for growing companies to enable them to turn other resources into higher value
Yeah.
opportunities.
Jane Gotts, though, isn't there always a risk that for business, the low-hanging fruit is always going to be the tempting one to go for? It's going to be the easiest market to crack. Do you want to take the microphone?
We talked about that a bit earlier, Keith, when I was speaking. You know, we were saying you look at the high growth markets, China, India, Brazil. Should companies be targeting that? They tend to be the difficult markets to go to, or should you be looking at Western Europe, which is easy to access, but don't demonstrate the same records of growth and opportunity? And it's really a business by business case, and it depends on the country. But it was picking up Ian's point on the infrastructure. We've recently been speaking to the bid team at Sri Lanka for the Commonwealth Games in 2018, and they're bidding to put the games in there in an area that was wiped away by the tsunami. Effectively, this area, Hambantota, is going to be completely redeveloped, and the games really is the catalyst for that growth. And what we're actually saying to them now is we are looking to build on the lessons from Glasgow to now sell that expertise and promote that expertise into Sri Lanka. And that's, I think, a really great lesson that we can be doing in Scotland. So it's not just a scattergun approach, it's picking where we have the knowledge, and where we can properly add value and meaningful value. Talking to Ian about Brazil earlier, they're hosting the World Cup and the Olympics in 2016. Now they have a huge skills shortage in terms of engineering for their infrastructure. Now that's something we're very good at. And you look at Skills Development Scotland, the work that's been done around the Commonwealth Games on modern apprenticeships, that's the kind of area where we can offer advice.
But that's an area of opportunity for business, isn't it? And opportunity and need do not always overlap perfectly.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but need brings opportunity as well. I mean, it works both ways.
Time for another couple of quick questions, if we've got them. Can I see some hands, please? In the middle there, yeah. Sorry, you hang on to the mic and tell us who you are and who you've got on your site.
I'm Julian Syme from Rwanda Alliance, Scottish Rwanda Alliance. One of the questions that came up in my workshop, which is the Sustainable Energy Workshop, was that you need some seed capital to start these projects off. You need, I mean, we're just individuals working for charities and doing our best to collect funds. But to start off these processes of development strategies, you need some seed capital. Either you go to a bank, or you go to a Scottish Power, or possibly the Scottish Government could think about having a development fund for providing this seed capital to get people together, because the expertise is here in Scotland. We've got a whole variety of expertise of dealing with sustainable energy, with carbon capture, with all these technologies which are going to be very important to developing countries who are experiencing the same problems of climate change, probably in a worse situation. So is there a possibility of the Scottish Government getting more power to dispense development funds, more power than it has at the moment?
Brian Dornan. Is lack of devolved power the issue, or is lack of money the issue, or is it both?
Again, this is something that I was mulling over today. We distribute £9 million a year, which isn't a huge amount, through the International Development Fund, and some of that goes to projects like Opportunities International, which are looking at microfinance, so business-type approaches to development. But I was struck today hearing about the Vodafone example, which was a commercial enterprise by Vodafone, a huge development success, but which also received some of its core funding from DFID. Or to hear about Anton's project, again, the catfish in Uganda, which is a commercial proposition, but which has received some funding from the Dutch International Development Agency. So, yeah, I would be quite interested in understanding those models a little bit better, and what is the role for public sector seed corn funding in those sorts of commercial enterprises. So it is something that I'm definitely interested in pursuing a little bit further.
How easy is it, though, maybe Anton's better to answer this than you, Brian, but I'll take it from others. How easy is it for a relatively small organisation with minimal staff resources to find its way through the jungle to where those sources of money are? And is that something with which perhaps government could help, or is it better than elsewhere? Anton, it looks like you're getting that one.
That'll be me then. That'll be me then. Don't mention catfish again, Brian. For our project specifically, then, you know, knowing that the Dutch government had this money available is the experience of the partners in the project, and we knew that there was access to this money before. And then if you talk to more and more people, then you get to know about it. We're getting the funding from the Dutch government because they're going to support the involvement of the Association of Small Farmers to buy shares in the core businesses, basically. But going back to the point that Julian made, I think then perhaps there is a need for the development of something in Scotland, even supporting NIDOS in developing again and taking further this idea of a business NGO-linked forum to explore opportunities and where there are synergies that exist.
So it's brokerage essentially that's needed, yeah? Okay. Take one more question, a quick one if we could. Yep, one more. At the back, yeah. Tell you what, there are two at the back. If they're both very quick, we'll squeeze them both in, but they'll have to be quick. Okay.
In a way, this
Tell
is
us who you are.
my name is Cathy Galloway, and I'm the head of Christian Aid Scotland. This is a kind of development of the last question in terms of looking at contemplating the possibility of a development fund, an investment fund, which that would provide that kind of seed capital, and that is not easily forthcoming from traditional sources. And we tend to think of this as being something that businesses could contribute, could contribute to. But I wonder if that is something that actually could be opened up more widely to the Scottish public, who give very generously, in terms to disasters and crises, but also might be persuaded to invest small amounts of money in a development fund if they knew that it was going to be used in that kind of way.
Thanks, Cathy. Could you just hand the mic back to Julian at the back of the room there? Yeah?
Hi, my name is Gillian Wilson from NIDOS. I was in the renewables workshop, and we had a question about, there seemed to be quite a lot of interest in our group about having a further discussion about how do we broker and take forward the discussion about renewable energy as a potential source for collaboration, area for collaboration between business, universities and charities. And the question was, what forum might there be in Scotland for taking this debate forward on the renewable side?
Okay, thanks very much. Let's take Cathy's question about the investment fund, the Scottish public first. Ian, does that strike you as a plausible and viable idea?
Well, I guess there's established ethical investors, the Co-op being one of them, and there's others such as Triodos Bank.
Yeah.
I guess their remit doesn't necessarily extend down to such small levels of investment, particularly overseas. I would think it would be very expensive to administrate. So I think you're looking at something, you would need to have something established in a target country to make something like that happen.
Judith, Cathy made the point, the Scottish public is very good at disaster donations. Are they likely to be equally good, do you think, at that sort of medium-term building for the future type of giving?
I did have a slight horror moment of the Darien adventure, so I kind of, but I'm sure that isn't what Cathy meant. I think it's a really interesting, to be honest, an interesting proposal. I don't know. We have various funding pots in Oxfam where we can encourage people to give through more of an investment process than a kind of donation process, which people potentially get a different thing back from. No, I think it's an interesting option.
Brian, is that something the government could get involved in organising?
I don't know about getting involved in organising.
Or facilitating, yes.
Perhaps. I mean, I think it is an interesting idea, and I guess it would be a combination again of government, NGOs, and business working together if we were to pursue that sort of thing. I guess it would be interesting to know if there is wider interest in it in the NGO community.
Okay, Jane. Gillian's question about does a body exist that is capable of taking forward these sorts of discussions?
Yeah, I know where you're leading to on this one, Keith. Certainly.
I think we have a mutual friend who runs something called the Scottish Renewables.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, there's also the Low Carbon Investment Conference that's taking place next week, I think, that the Scottish Government are involved in supporting here in Edinburgh, and that's looking at what the opportunities are for the renewable sector and the whole low carbon sector going forward, Gillian. So it might be worthwhile having a look to see if NIDOS could attend that. and you know, take forward your idea. But absolutely, and I think I said this earlier as well, public sector and private sector and the third sector and the voluntary sector and NGOs seem to be aligning more now towards international trade. We see that coming together more, and I don't know whether that's just because of difficult times and it's created an opportunity for people to work together.
Anton, last word, do you share Jane's optimism about that? Or confidence would be a better word.
Yeah, I think I've said my bit already, perhaps, that there are definitely opportunities, and certainly from my own experience, I think it's very positive. But the key thing, I think, is trust, really, to develop that sense of trust and sort of taking a chance and trying to get a partnership to work, even on a small scale to start with.
Okay, that, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, is where we run out of time. Would you please join me in thanking Brian Dorman, Ian Irvin, Judith Robertson, Jane Gotts, and Anton Inman at the end. Thank you very much.